Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second to final video in the contest roundup for the 2021 photo contest. This is black and white. We're actually going to do two things in this video. We're going to go through all of the black and white entrants and then the category winners, and then we're also going to go over the best photo of the contest because it was entered in this category. So, without further ado, let's take a look at this first one, which comes from Danny Flewelling. And really enjoyed the way that the lighting was used in this image. So what we've got here is a mostly low-key image, backlit, with in-frame lighting. In-frame lighting is pretty tough to do unless you do it correctly because it can cause flaring and ghosting in your images if it hits your lens at the right angle. But overall, I really like the way that this image combines shadow and light. So what you can see is the shadow of the musician's microphone stand, and you can see some detail in him, but by and large, a lot of the detail turns into something like a silhouette. And then you can see the frame of the speakers and the stage as well. So realistically, this is an image that shows the importance of good lighting and lighting control, even if your lighting is, hey, this is a really good opportunity to take a photo. Whether it's set up or not, I couldn't tell you about this image. But this is a really great image in how lighting makes an image when it's done well. All right, the second shot here is a higher up. It's a street scene. Well, a city scene. It's not fair to call it a street scene. And this image comes to us from Frank Wouters. Oh, I hope I pronounced your name right. In case you can't tell, this is actually the first of the videos I'm recording, even though it's going to be one of the last to go live. Anyway, back to the video. So here we have a city scene. Looks like a European city, but I couldn't tell you which one. And what we have really here is the dominant features are the bridge and the river, and then that big block of forest, those two big blocks of forest. And those two blocks of forest, which are really dark, do a lot to keep the viewer's eyes towards that bridge. And then the fogginess and the distant mountains hemming in the top third of the frame do a lot to keep our eyes down. So really, everything in the shape and the structure of this image is driving the viewer's eyes towards that bridge. It becomes the dominant part of the scene. And overall, really good, really strong image structure in this photo. So this photo is from Tim Peters, and this is looks like a World War II or Vietnam, I can't remember which he said, reenactment, where he was taking a photo, doing the photos during the reenactment. So even though it's a reenactment, because of the photographic style here, it really does feel like this could be a found photo from the war that's being reenacted. And I think that's really well done and a great stylistic choice on Tim's part in terms of selecting a media that's appropriate to the subject and a media that's going to help tell the story very well. This photo comes from Joe Polito, and this is a photo of a tree with a cemetery in the background. I found the structure of this image incredibly pleasing. This could have been entered here. It could also have been entered in Break a Rule pretty easily because so many of the branches of the tree are cut off. However, one of the things that I think that is going on really well with the structure and the way that the tree fills up more than the frame is that the tree becomes, it looks sort of like a structure that holds the picture's edges up from collapsing. And if you imagine this photo without the tree, it would be really boring. The big tree is really what's giving the framing and composition of this photo a lot to work with, a lot to go off of. For you as a viewer, it's going to be much more visually interesting. In addition, because of the setting within the graveyard, it gives that tree a little bit more meaning than if that was, say, an empty field or a pond behind it. It wouldn't have the same emotional resonance. And basically, what this feels like is that you've got the graveyard, and if it weren't for that tree, everything would collapse in around it, which I think is a good way that an image can represent the feeling that a person has either going to a graveyard or knowing that they or someone else will sooner rather than later be going to that graveyard. So I think that this image is doing a really good job of having the structure mirror the emotional weight that it carries. This next shot comes from Kevin Rios, and it's a photo of, he told me who it was, and I don't have the email open in front of me. I think it was one of his family members carrying their son, the family member's son, up the stairs. And I just took a pause to take a look down the stairs at the photo, and it turned out well. And you can tell by a lot of the image character here that it is a film photo, and that's a pretty difficult shot from a technical perspective. Okay, so from technically looking at this, you've got a very bright white blown out area in the back in the middle, right? And then you've got the subject wearing a black shirt, and he's standing in shadow. And overall, the shadows are really pretty well controlled in this, all that said. So the highlights do lose a little bit of detail, but you can still make out the shadow of the people walking through that highlight area. None of the highlights in the trees are really blown out. From a technical perspective, this is really, really just a spot on technical execution in a photo. So very, very well done on that, Kevin. The only detraction I would have again about composition would be, had you taken a step to the right, then the guy in the background, who right now is a distracting element, would have been behind your subject, completely hidden. So that's the only, if you had the opportunity to take this shot in this exact moment again, that's the only change I would have suggested making. But otherwise, very well executed. This photo comes to us from Luis Alvarado, and this is a photo, I believe he said, of a father and son at home. Very, very touching photo. And one of the things that's really interesting to me in here is that not only do you get to see this moment between the father and son, and you can see the affection that they have for each other, you can see them in their surroundings, and you can see that that the father's really giving everything to his son. And I thought this was a very touching image that not only shows their connection, but gives you a nice momentary view into what the lives of the people in the photo are like. Very well executed in that regard. This waterfall shot was taken by, I don't know if it's Noe or Noe Landaverde, and this is a long exposure waterfall. Couldn't tell you exactly what it's coming down. Looks like it's probably a rock face, but I guess it could be like a rock retaining wall. Anyway, from a technical perspective, very well executed. The wall's very dark. The water isn't highly blown out. Like there are a few places where it's very bright, but it's not super bright where the details are lost. And that's very, very hard to do in a long exposure like this. So very well done. If there were any compositional changes, you can see in the bottom left, there's an obstruction there. And also if there were a way to use a wider lens from the same vantage point so that you could get a little bit more of what the waterfall is flowing into, that could really give a little bit of context to the waterfall and also some added drama at the lower part of the frame, because right now the waterfall just kind of ends at the bottom of the picture. This photo of the cat comes from Richard Mander, and it's a portrait of, I would assume, his or one of his cats, and very, very good portrait. It can be very hard to get animals to engage with the camera, look directly into it. When I photograph dogs, it is very, very hard for me to get them to make eye contact with the lens. The use of a shallow depth of field here to get just the cat's nose to the back of its ears in focus, or the front of its ears in focus, is really excellent. Like, all the stuff that needs to be in focus is in focus. Exposure quality is exceptional. You've got great detail in the shadows and the highlights, and amazing, amazing amounts of detail in the cat's eyes. Very well captured, Richard. This photo comes from Rod Stewart. It's a photo of parents holding hands with their kid, and you can tell that without even seeing them because of the shadow. And so that's the point, obviously, of course, is because it's a shadow study image. Shadow studies for me are always a huge challenge because it's not a type of photo that I'm drawn to in my own work. And so they're always hard for me to look at and say, here's what could be done differently, better, worse, whatever. But a couple of observations here that I would make are that these shadows end right at the top of the frame, so it almost feels like everything's upside down. I don't know if it would be different if the photo was actually upside down. I don't know if it would be better or worse. I also do happen to like the way that the lines in the concrete are not lined up with the frame, the edges of the image, that they're running through at different diagonals and that they're converging. So I think that, I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just happenstance, but the way that the pavement lines in this image create different shapes within it just ends up creating a very pleasing effect as well. And also I like, and I think it's a very good execution, that the shadows are just not black, but that you can actually see the lines of the pavement and the texture and the sidewalk within the shadows. And that is a really good way of executing this type of image. All right, this photo of the rocket launch comes from Samuel West. I think he said this was a SpaceX rocket. All right, there's a lot going really well in this photo. So starting with something that I think might not jump off the plate or off the screen immediately is the tone in the sky. Now, it's just a gray tone, gray gradient, but one of the really nice things about it is that it creates a neutral background for the rest of the image, and that allows the rest of the image to really stand on its own. So at the front, you've got a little bit of plant that's distracting, not the end of the world. Having just the water in front of it, I think would have been a little bit of a better element if there was a way to get the camera, maybe about 6 inches higher. I don't know exactly where this was taken, where in Florida this was taken, and if that's possible. So not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. The detail in the steam cloud behind the rocket, especially that some of the launch apparatus are still visible because the steam hasn't enveloped it, stunning. Like, it's really sharp, very crisp and in focus, and also the fact that it's not just coming out of a cloud, that you can kind of see some of the stuff that launched it is really exceptional. And then the rocket, like, I know that rockets don't shoot off the launch pad like a bullet, so it's still coming up to speed, but they're not slow. And the fact that you can see some of the, I would imagine that some of the fuel burning or some part of the launch apparatus burning behind it, and you can see little flames or sparks in midair, frozen in midair without blur at the back of the rocket, also tells you this is a really fast exposure. So great photos are never taken at a 60th of a second. Well, rarely. If you have a flash photo on an old camera, yes, okay. But in the general sense, great photos are taken when they freeze time in ways that the brain can't perceive on its own, or they extend time for the same reason. So the only real flaw that I would point out with this image is that the rocket is effectively touching the top of the frame. So when you have an action shot, as a general rule, what you want to have is room for that thing that's doing the motion to keep going, because otherwise it looks like this rocket is literally about to crash into the edge of the frame. And we know it's not, but that's how it kind of appears here. So even if there were, let's say that imagine this photo being taken in portrait orientation, okay? Same width, but this would only be the bottom 2/3 of the image. And now there's another third on top of it of sky. Or imagine that same orientation, but you lift the bottom of the camera up just slightly. So you don't have any water in the foreground, it's just shoreline. And then that cloud is just a little bit above the bottom of the frame. And then you've got a little bit more space on top for the rocket to move into. So if you were to have another chance to photograph something like this again, imagine how that playing with that orientation would give your rocket a little bit more space to move toward the top of the frame. But excellent capture. This photo comes from Stephen Boyce and is a photo of, I'm assuming, a bride with a camera on her wedding day. I think we could spend quite a bit of time talking about the way that tonality is working in this image, because we've got a very dark background with her standing in front of it and a really nice gray tone range. And in very, very many regards, this is a great example of what makes a fantastic classic black and white photograph, especially the contrast between the white of the bride's dress and the black of the wood door behind her. And then being framed in with the gray pillar at the left, really, really good work getting that framing on that well done and not cut off or anything like that, and also keeping the bride in the center. If there were one change to make right off the bat, I'd say grab your cloning brush and take that sign off the door, and then maybe bring in the right side just a hair to get rid of that hinge on the right side of the image. Those are the only two changes I would really make. I think otherwise it's a very compelling capture. And those are, by the way, pretty darn nitpicky changes. So Weston Harvey sent over this photo. It was part of a study he did this year on architectural details. I am a huge fan, by the way, of architectural details, where the photos convert the architectural details into their component shapes. And that's exactly what this does, and exceedingly well. Basically, what this has done is by using the black and white image, the black and white format for this image, it's taken away all the color data. So I couldn't tell you if this wall was red or orange or purple. It doesn't matter, because all that we have now are these two shapes, the triangle and the trapezoid. I don't know what that's, polygon. We're going to call it a polygon. We have those two shapes and we have the texture in them. And then they become, then the black areas also become their own shape, although really they're negative space. So what we have now is an image that has taken away the depth. Now we can see, if we look at this, that the shadow that forms the hypotenuse of the triangle is actually being cast by what looks like a wall. And so this is a three-dimensional object, but because it's a two-dimensional image, and because everything becomes flat, it really just becomes a study of the way that the shapes interact. And I'm going to argue that also, when it comes to architecture, a huge, huge part of good architectural design is just looking at the way the shapes of the buildings interact with each other. So I think this is an excellent use of that vein of architectural study, and that it does a good amount of work towards looking at what good architecture can do with shape and form. This image was submitted by Anton Rozkov, and it's a photo of a ginkgo tree. And I really like the way that it's got the last leaves of fall still holding on to the branches. And I like also that I'm torn. It's definitely a wide angle lens. It looks kind of like, it's not a fisheye though. It doesn't bend the world quite enough. Anyway, got a little bit off topic there. I do like that this looks like a branch, but the background on the bottom right corner, I can't tell if this branch, what angle it actually moves up at the in real life. So the way that this image is structured leaves me asking a lot of questions about what this tree actually looks like in real life and how it's grown there. And also, from a technical perspective, really good work in capturing shadow detail without blowing out your highlights. Oh, this photo is really good. All right, I saved this one for the last before going into the honorable mentions, because it is a really great photo. And this comes to us from Aravindan. And overall, just an exceptional quality of work in his portfolio. And this photo here, it does such a good job of using light and shadow to tell you exactly what you are supposed to look at, okay? If you look over to the left, you've got that dark shadow that the iron grates are in front of. And then if you look behind it, you've got these people in light and shadow who are, again, hemming in from behind the subject. So the subject is isolated. He is functionally trapped in this moment where he's at. And the darkness on the left, the lightness behind, and then the people behind the subject also force our eyes to look right at the subject so we know exactly what who the subject of the photo is. And I really, just from the moment I saw this photo, I was like, that is really captivating image structure. So really good use of street photography and being able to look at a scene and say, right now, this moment, I'm taking a photo of it and it's going to turn out well, or I hope it's going to turn out well. And it did. Really phenomenal shot. All right, we have 2 honorable mentions. So let's take a look at these. They are both excellent shots for completely different reasons. First up, from Jonathan Mayberry, we have a study of an eggshell. And at first, if you think about some of the photos we just looked at, like, it's an eggshell. Yeah. But this is a hard photo. Like, black backgrounds are really challenging to do well, especially when there's a reflection in the underneath them. So let's assume that this was done with an actual mirror underneath the egg and that it's not some Photoshop trickery. It doesn't look like Photoshop trickery. And then a black backdrop. The lighting on this would have to be absolutely perfect. Like, getting the lighting right on this subject would be so hard, because now the way I would do this if this was me, I would get a light with a snoot on it. A snoot is a lighting modifier. Basically what it does is it takes a light that's being dispersed outward like a cone, and then it sort of focuses it so that it's projected into a cylinder. And then you'd have to point that cylinder down and level with the egg. Now, if you look at the lighting on the egg, that shadow that's on the right side of it, and then the shadow that's on the inside of the shell, you can see that that light is in fact coming from the left. It's coming from about, if you were to draw a straight line from the camera out to the egg, go left at about a 45-degree angle, and that's where the light's coming from, and that's backed up by the bright highlight of the light in the back of the eggshell. So really challenging to light, because now how do you get rid of the lighting in the background? Because if you don't have the light aimed perfectly, then the background's going to be illuminated. So I'm going to guess that the background is a little bit further behind the egg, and that it's probably at a bit of an angle so that the stray light passing the egg can harmlessly go off into some other part of the room. And then my best bet is that this whole studio setup was done in what's called a dark room with no other lights on. So in terms of the image composition, really like the choice of this eggshell because of the crack in the front of it. It has a very interesting break all around the edges. And then that crack that's in what we see as the front of the eggshell really does a lot to set that eggshell, to make it visually interesting. So I think that's really a good choice. Only technical nitpick here, there's some dust spots on the image, and would have just cloned those out. Not a huge deal, because all of the really hard parts of this image are executed super well. Second honorable mention comes from Chris May, and this is a photo of a train conductor. I believe this is one of Chicago's, what do they call it? One of Chicago's L train conductors. I forget what he wrote me a note about this one, and I read it and have neglectfully forgotten what it said. Anyway, really enjoy the image composition here, because what you've got is the subject in very good focus, and his outfit is dark, but you've got the detail of the fabric. You can see some of the shinier pieces of the fabric around his pockets, the detail in the way that the fabric hangs around him as he's wearing it, and then this very hot, bright background area where some of the highlights are blown out, but really not all of them. And then you've got some distance to the subject, because there's at least one empty bench between the photographer, or you as the viewer, and the subject. And the way that it's structured with the subject's feet basically on the bottom of the frame, really good, because it the cropping on this really puts you as the viewer closer to the subject than you actually would be if you were looking at this scene in real life. So just a stunningly good image that I thought was really great. First runner-up. Now this is what we would call second place, and the person who took this photo is going to get a roll of 120 film. And this was taken by Diego Leon. This looks like a night street scene. I'm guessing it's night because the moon is out. It would be possible to do this during the day, but it would be a ton of work. Plus the lighting coming from the street really does make this look like a legit nighttime street photo. So either this was super high ISO or just exceedingly well done. It's a great image. So I was very pleased with this. And this goes, by the way, the entrants in the category this year for black and white were across the board all spectacular. So this is just one of the examples that was just an amazingly spectacular image. There's a whole lot going on. It really places you as the image's viewer in the scene. So there's no doubt that when you see this image, you're feeling the activity of this nighttime market. You can almost hear what's going on, and the way that the in-scene lighting, again, second image in a row with in-scene lighting, combines with the darkness of the overall sky, really also does a nice amount of work to frame in the image and keep the attention of the viewer down in the lower third. Now, if you imagine this image cropped down to, say, the roof line of the tallest building, the one on the right, would it be the same image? No, it would not be at all. And it would not be as good an image. The reason that this image succeeds is not just because it's put you in this scene. It's not just because the blackness of the sky makes this scene seem like there is nothing that exists in the world beyond it. It's because the moon is up there, and it gives perspective to time. It gives a reason for the frame to go up that high. And it also, because the moon is centered like that, also creates a sort of overall triangular shape to the activity in the image, which further helps to keep the viewer's eyes in the frame. This is a really, truly spectacular image and very, very well captured. And that leaves the winner of the category. Now, there are two of you out there who submitted who are saying, oh, it's got to be me. One of you won the category, and one of you is going to take the best overall photo for the entire contest. Okay, so the winner of the category for the second year straight is Jared with a really stunningly good portrait. I couldn't tell you if this is a portrait of a person or that he knows, or whether this is a self-portrait, but this is one of the most viscerally tangible photos I've ever seen, and I'd say probably the most viscerally tangible photo of this entire contest this year. And I think that the way that it was, the digital manipulation in it is a little bit obvious, but that's okay because it does a lot to set the mood. And the amount of darks in the way that the shadows take away a lot of the detail contributes to the overall mood. Now, if he had a different background, if he wasn't sitting in front of this graffitied background, this mood wouldn't work. So it's not just the way that the lighting and the shadows being pulled back have created this, but it's also the way that the specific setting, the litter on the sidewalk leading up to the subject, the grittiness of the wall that he's sitting up against, the way that the eave behind him also has texture, and then the absence of texture in so many other things, and the difference of texture in his coat and in his boots versus the wood planking, and the way that the lines in the planks meet up with each other, much different textures throughout. It just all, and then of course the brightness of the grass underneath. All of this really works together to create just a phenomenally captivating image with very good image structure. Everything here is done very, very well. Exceptionally, exceptionally good capture. And then the overall best photo of the entire contest was taken by Jean-Francois. Really phenomenally captivating image again. So we have this portrait of two people, right? And one of them's looking, the one who has the majority of the frame, about 2/3 of it, is looking off toward the side of the frame at the source of this off-frame light. And then the other one is engaged in her own work. One of the things that I really like about this shot is that it uses the square format better than almost any photo I can think of ever having seen, because it's taken the square format and it's divided it into two portrait orientation structures with that column that's in the middle. So if you see that line going down the middle of the column, and then you imagine two photos next to each other in portrait orientation being sandwiched together, that's kind of what this is doing. And even though we know, because we can see that there's a space between that column and the one behind it, and these two could interact with each other, because the nature of a photograph, taking something that is three-dimensional and turning it into something two-dimensional, it makes it appear as though there is a wall separating these two women. So I think it's a really good use also of perspective, because this is a perspective that could only, in the world of this photograph, exist from the exact spot in which this photo was taken. And Jean-Francois also in his note to me noted that this was taken on Shanghai GP 100 with, I think he said a Mamiya TLR. And also a really, really great use of film, and a good use of Shanghai, because it's a pretty darn good 100 ISO film. And this is a great example of what it can do. So Jean-Francois takes home the 8x10 pinhole camera. Jared takes home a 5-pack of Color Plus 100, and Diego takes home a roll of the 120. Not sure yet whether it'll be the Fuji 400H or the Fuji E6. At any rate, one of those two will show up, and I will reach out to you guys separately to get your information. Thank you everybody for watching, and tomorrow we will, or later today. Anyway, the next video in this year's contest series will be the overall portfolio winner, which I consider to be the top prize. And we'll take a look at all of the portfolios that were submitted for everybody who submitted their entire portfolios, and talk about how they work together as portfolio entries.